All right, so some point questions to drive the solution. Just before we get into the individual pieces here, really some it's various pillars, right, of the decision making process, and really business use case, requirements, hosting, features, solutions. There's probably some more, but when we were thinking through this, app data, as consultants, when we get into it with our customers, we have to think through the various pillars to come to one of the which solution is best for your organization, right? So there's a few defining factors at the beginning, which will easily, if you've ever seen those flow charts, will easily help us make some decisions pretty quickly. So that's where this is kind of laying that out a little bit to help describe that. And I'll let Shane get into this a little bit more, but you can
Yeah.
see those questions at the top there, and that helps us, guides us on the way, and helps eliminate some of the choices that might not make the most sense.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of this, believe it, I mean, you can go crazy with all the features and functionalities and build these big matrices across all the solutions. But if you take a step back and you start at the business case, and it sounds cliche, well, start at the business case. It's true. You really do need to start there. You need to understand the business, the use case that drives requirements, and those requirements. And you look at the business cases, a lot of those are generic, but those are a lot of the ones we run into all the time. And there's a lot more that aren't listed there. And you'll look at those and realize those are a lot of those in your organization. Requirements come from those business cases, and then those requirements then drive our hosting platform. And what we're seeing is the hybrid on the hosting. And so from that perspective, whether it's hybrid or it's AWS only, Azure only, those just that question alone could drive what solution you're going to go to, right? If you require a hybrid, you require on-prem and Azure and want single management plane, well, Azure, Nerdio, right? Those aren't for you. That's more of a Citrix or Parallels play. And so a big piece with the hosting is apps and data, right? As it's the golden rule, right? When you have any kind of remoting solution, your apps and data need to be close to each other, right? But we're seeing more and more folks using SaaS, SaaS and SaaS apps, right? And so more modern applications. And so with that, there's different security controls around that. But maybe if you're more SaaS, Office 365 based for a portion of your users, which is what we're seeing, maybe it's temp work. My headrest just came off. Maybe it's temp workers, things like that. Things like Office 360 or Windows 365, and we'll talk about all the solutions around that. But there's this kind of mix that's going on, and we're seeing this EUC states become a mix across some of the enterprises. And then from there, you then drive into the individual features that you actually require. Maybe it's unified communications. Do you need the granular policy control? Do you need, high latency efficiency protocol, or is most of your stuff, inside of the U.S., right, or in a certain region? Do you require advanced session recording or forensics, privilege elevation, right? Intune has that, WEM has that. So as you get into these advanced security controls like device posture check, stuff like that, as you get into the features, again, for each of these individual use cases, think back to that user layer, that then drives a solution. So we wanted to kind of point this out. So things Oz put at the top, right? On-prem, where is it hosted? How many seats are required? Shift work or not? Self-managed, DAS control plane, CSP or managed. Those are again all things that we're talking to. We take this and we go a lot deeper in the questioning up front to help drive to the solution, right? We do a lot of workshops, things like that, because you don't want to waste time testing 10 different solutions when you don't have your requirements defined day one. So, anyways, this is just kind of to create a little bit of a visual there.
Yep, yep. And so we'll start into like each of these individual ones. So this is Shane's cool slide. I like this.
Nice. Yeah. So Oz had to step it up. He's like, I want to do a little bit of, scary stuff. And then all of a sudden, him and Ray started coming out with these crazy AI generated images. So I had to spend my nights figuring all that. Did I say AI generated? I mean, handcrafted images. So Microsoft and Nerdio, let's dive in. Let me start my timer, because I could talk for 3 hours straight. So everyone keep me on point here. Let's rock and roll. So, oh wait, I can click next, right? Can I click
You
next?
should be able to.
It's not working for me. The next
There you
button.
go.
Okay, okay. So let's talk about Nerdio. So at AVD, we saw a bunch of people are using, a good portion, I think it was like 40% are using Azure Virtual Desktop, right? That's Microsoft's platform as a service, DaaS-based solution, right? That's their, what are we going back, 4 or 5 years ago, right? That kind of came out, right? But it's over the years has gotten a little bit better, but as far as the management, admin, operational side of things, would we say it's enterprise ready? Yeah. It's more about like, do you have the DevOps and the Terraform, the scripting and frameworks to do all those things to make it enterprise ready? That's why, for us, we look at, Nerdio, right? And so we'll talk about like Nerdio as an enhancement and what it brings to the table for AVD based environments, right? And that's kind of our go-to. And so that's what we'll be talking about here in the next few minutes. So Nerdio is all about automating and optimizing the deployment and management of AVD, so Azure Virtual Desktop, Windows 365 Cloud PC, and Intune. So Intune's fairly recent. I think it's within a year. So again, using the Graph API. So Nerdio, and when I talk, I tend to jump ahead, so it kind of all just comes together. So I might mention something that's on the other side, but essentially, Nerdio is all API driven, right? And that's one of the really powerful things about it. And so think of it, it's not something that's a bump in the wire, right? It's something that if Nerdio goes down, you can still broker your desktop. Your Intune environment's still managed, and that's a really, really important piece there. And so it's really the enterprise boost for AVD. It's also cost optimization for AVD. Can guarantee you it pays for itself, and I'll show you some data points from one of the customers where you can see how much they actually track the savings in real time because they think of like for those of you that are Control Up customers. Control Up was built from the core DNA of admins and consultants, right? This is the same folks on the Nerdio side. They were MSP providers, they were admins, they were consultants. And you'll notice that and you can tell a solution that's built by people that are in the field all the time because they're like 10 steps ahead of where you are and what you're thinking of. And they're constantly bringing innovation to the product. And I really feel like these guys are like the Control Up for management of AVD, right? And so with that, you'll see some of the things that we'll sprinkle in through the conversation. Unified management again. So maybe you don't have access to Intune. You traditionally didn't. That's the endpoint team. Nerdio gives you a single interface where you can manage Intune without actually being into Intune, going into the portal and have that unified experience there. So if we talk about the architecture, there's really two solutions on the Nerdio side. So Nerdio really is NME, so Nerdio for Enterprise, and NMM, which is the MSP side. We're going to be focusing on the enterprise side. So Azure, it's basically a one-click deployment in Microsoft Azure. So it's PaaS, platform as a service, self-hosted, automated deployment. Literally one click, it deploys. It's going to deploy all the architectural components for you. With that, there's a platform fee. It's not Nerdio charging you. Nerdio charges you a 100 user minimum, essentially. So you need to have at least 100 users. And so if you're like a 25 user environment, you still got to pay for that 100. That gives, I think it's like $1,000 a month or something like that. And then $250 a month essentially is the Azure compute to kind of run that compute unit, which consists of Azure SQL, app services, log analytics, et cetera, et cetera. So one appliance, you can have multiple tenants, multiple Entra tenants, multiple subscriptions, RBAC's all built in, zone resiliency. And the key thing to keep in mind here is it's not a protocol and it's not it's not a broker, right? It's an overlay technology. And so those are some of the pieces: Key Vault, app services, automation manager, et cetera. And so what it looks like, this is kind of our jumpstart architecture. We'll talk about that later. But Nerdio over here on the right actually plugs into Windows 365, plugs into Azure Virtual Desktop, into the subscription, into Entra, and brings it all under a single management interface. So with that said, a quick highlight here on the admin and operational side. So it's really about on the Nerdio side, it's really about automated deployment. So with that said, on the automated deployment side, it's a one-click deployment through the Azure Marketplace. If you're a customer that has committed spend, you can use private offers and things like that to actually pay for Nerdio, which is pretty cool. Seamless interop with Azure ecosystem. We'll show a screenshot on that in a second. So it's deeply integrated within the Azure ecosystem. Intelligent auto scale. It really went deep on the auto scale side, looking at things like for instance, looking at, memory, CPU, not just looking at user count, right? Actually taking resource optimization, taking in different schedules, being able to scale up an environment and scale it back down. cost optimization. So being able to look at, for instance, the disks that are in use, right? So when it goes and shuts a machine down, it swaps the disks on the back end. It's constantly thinking about how it could save you money. Automated image management, app deployment, and policy. And so if we look here, a couple screenshots, we have Nerdio Manager for Enterprise. So basically, this is one-click deployment out of the Azure Marketplace. When you're actually logged into Nerdio and you take a look at the Azure integration portion, you'll see it has the Ensure tenant over here to the left. To the right is multiple subscriptions. What VNets are you linking to? What subnets? Bring in all the different resource groups. Essentially, what it's doing is Nerdio's service principal. As long as you give it access to your Azure environment, you can plug it into an existing AVD deployment, and it brings all that plumbing right into Nerdio. And then Intune also is integrated as well. So with that said, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but what we can show you is basically all the different host pools, and it constantly on the right is doing monthly savings on and breaking it down on a per user cost. If we zero in on that, you can take a customer here. The projected cost is a large financial organization with traders and whatnot, but it was about $30,000 a month was the typical, but they're actually saving $8,900 a month by implementing intelligent auto scale and the Nerdio optimization policies. That's a real world use case right there, which is pretty awesome. So with that said, Nerdio also does a fantastic job around the self-service side. You'll see a little bit of this as well with Windows 365. So self-service portal for VM sizing. So think on the personal side, persistent side. You want to resize your desktop. You want to give it to a contractor or a developer. Things like operationally, start, stop, restore, snapshot, backup, scripted actions. If you have scripts inside of Nerdio, you can have the user create those. Execute those as well as install applications. And maybe in the future, there's going to be a Copilot because there's Copilot for Nerdio. I could see there being a chat-based interface there as well. So basically, once you're inside a Nerdio on the cloud, the personal desktop, you can say and Nerdio is all about kind of locking things in and customization, but what VM sizes can they do? What disks can they actually resize to, for instance? Taking a look at things like, on the scripted. So one of the actions was enabling or disabling clipboard and applications and things of that nature. Here's what the self-service portal looks like. And so you can see applications, run tasks, resize, power start, those sorts of things. So it really does enable, empower the user. And resiliency side on the Nerdio. So built-in host pool and DR. So basically on the DR side, traditional host pool, there's a one-click DR. It actually does the automation and replication on the back end to enable you to have your AVD environment in another region. It's all API driven. It's all out of band. If Nerdio goes down, again, the environment still operates. You do lose your auto scale for that small duration that it might be down. And if it goes down, it's self-hosted. It's not a cloud service, right? It's all self-hosted in your environment. Running low on a little time here, so I'm probably not going to show. I'll just show the screen for a second here, just so you can see the Nerdio console. We'll just probably skip ahead, Oz. So you just hit play, and I'm just gonna hit play for a second.
Yeah, I'm getting it. There we go.
Yeah. 15 minutes goes fast. Just under so you can just see here, if you hit pause right there. So what you can basically see is the auto scale settings inside of the Nerdio console. And it actually will let you go and pick the images that you want to scale it to. It actually does things that, if you think about it, AVD doesn't have non-persistent, right? If anyone didn't know that, there's no non-persistent in AVD unless you're doing like an ephemeral disk, right? It is persistent until that next image update. Nerdio can make it feel like non-persistent because of the way it's doing its automation, being able to reuse the same VM names, swap disks out, those sorts of things. So let's just go ahead and click the next one. What naming convention, as well as things like, for instance, memory, CPU, compute, as far as the auto scale side. So we'll just go to the next video because I'm running, unfortunately, low on time.
Yeah, there's a good look here on the video you made. So
yes. Yeah, so if you let it scroll, we'll just for a second, it's not too much. But right here is really, if we pause, this is really the power, right? Is being able to have the scaling logic to not just scale out, but scale in.
Yep.
You don't see that in the Citrix world, right? Being able to scale in when you hit certain thresholds. Your CPU's, lower, your memory's lower. Maybe you're scaling up for a reporting that needed to happen end of month. It will actually scale in that environment. And you see that everything in Nerdio is tracked from a configuration logging standpoint. So you'll see that happen over time, pre-staging the hosts and things like that. All that stuff and also auto healing, right? If it sees that the AVD agent is bad, it's going to go attempt to redeploy it and heal it. and set monitoring and alerting based on that. So pretty cool. Endpoints is just a quick screen just to basically see that it's bringing in all the Intune capabilities, which is really, really powerful. So if you take a look here, so I'll just go ahead and hit play.
Yeah, this is really cool stuff.
Yeah. So what's awesome here is it's actually taking the Intune integration. If you click enable there, it's connecting into the Graph APIs. It's bringing in. You literally can manage the Nerdio environment under the same umbrella. So what you're seeing here is being able to see physical devices that are here, being able to take actions on those physical autopilot reset. Not Bitcoin, BitLocker keys. Here's a cloud PC, being able to go in and see the properties of the PC. These are all things that are coming directly, your compliance policies, user experience score. This is all stuff coming directly from Intune, but Nerdio is rewrapping that interface and making it more, make more sense. All the configuration settings, which we'll talk about with Windows 365, so I won't go about it here, but configuration profiles, baselines, conditional access, all those Intune native policies are 100% inside of Nerdio. Today, there's kind of a JSON interface. You can do assignments, but obviously it's not as native as Intune, but it's just going to keep getting better. But you can go build your provisioning policies for Windows 365, which is pretty awesome. So at the end of the day, we come to close on the AVD and Nerdio side. So what we have here on the left is welcome, and then we have a do not enter. So welcome is who's this for? And do not enter is who's it not for, right? AVD plus Nerdio. So welcome, come on in. Come on in. AVD, right? If you're an Azure Virtual Desktop customer, 100 monthly users are active. To me, it's a no-brainer to look at a Nerdio type solution because of what it's doing and from a cost optimization standpoint. Now, with that said, workloads, essentially it's workloads only hosted in Azure and on-prem if you're using Azure Stack ACI. If you're in AWS, you're on-prem with, VMware AHV on the Nutanix side. Nerdio is not for you, right? Unified management. You want AVD, you want Microsoft Cloud PC and Intune all in a single interface, 100% for you. Simplifying DR and host pools, automated backup and recovery. And then there's something I didn't talk about, but PII scrubbing. They actually are plugging into the Azure OpenAI, and they're actually doing some hooks to basically use the PII engine and start using some of that AI to auto scrub all your logs and pull out PII data. That's pretty powerful and mask that data. That's what, again, that's the way Nerdio thinks. They're starting to bring in the chat GPT like functionality. That's one of those key features that from a security standpoint. One thing I didn't mention is the whole CIS images, hardened images. They partnered there. They're bringing in CIS hardened images as well. Who's it not for? Already mentioned that on the Stack side. If you're not hosted on Azure, under 100 users, right? We automate everything. So there are some organizations that are like, hey, I automate everything with Terraform. I don't need to use Nerdio. But I've seen some large enterprises that are a 1 or 2 man team doing that. You put all your eggs in that basket and they move on because they're going to move on, right? And at the end of the day, it's a crazy job market. You can't keep everybody, right? You try to have the best possible environment, but you have to plan for resiliency, right? And having a solution like this makes everyone a Terraform admin, not that they're programming, but in the logic and how they do the automation, right? And so something you want to think about there. If costs are a factor, look at the cost optimization. Again, I promise you it will pay for itself when you look at how it's working, right? And in the auto scale scenario, right? If they're 100% 24/7, there's not a lot to optimize there. Nerdio is not a protocol. We already talked about that, but it's limited by the RDP-based protocol. Oz is going to talk to the enhancements, so I won't talk to this, but you'll see why Citrix makes sense in some scenarios.